Hey guys, tonight we dive into the fiery world of Hephaestus, the god who literally molded the tools of the gods but decided one day that Mount Olympus just wasn't worth the hassle anymore. Imagine standing on that legendary mountain peak, clouds swirling, lightning crackling, while Hephaestus, hammer in hand, is staring off into the distance, sulking like a teen who just got grounded for the 1000th time. You probably won't survive this journey without feeling a little sympathy for a god who gets constantly overlooked and underappreciated. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments, because we're about to travel across realms and centuries, and it's always cooler to know who's tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by picturing Hephaestus, not the usual flash and glory kind of god, but one who's been hanging around Olympus with a scowl, the only god with a limp. His forge, buried deep inside a volcanic mountain, constantly glows red-hot. He's hammering at a new creation, sparks flying, sweat dripping down his brow. His workshop smells of molten metal and sulfur, like a blacksmith's paradise, but you get the sense that this is more than just a job for Hephaestus. It's a refuge from the cold shoulder he gets up on Olympus. Historically, Hephaestus was indeed worshipped by the ancient Greeks as the divine smith, and his cults were often centered near volcanic areas like Mount Etna or the island of Lemnos, places where fire and earth meet in violent beauty. Those spots were thought to be entrances to his forge, a fascinating fact that blends natural phenomena with mythological imagination. Meanwhile, fringe scholars argue whether Hephaestus's lameness symbolizes deeper social themes about imperfection and divine rejection, or if it's just an old myth trying to explain physical disabilities. Historians still argue whether his limp was a punishment from Zeus or Hera, or simply a sign of his outsider status among the gods. Anyway, as you watch him work, there's a quiet tension. Hephaestus isn't just hammering metal, he's crafting weapons and gifts for gods who don't exactly treat him like family. You get the vibe he's tired of being the overlooked craftsman while others get the glory. That simmering resentment is the first spark in the story of why he's about to do something truly unexpected: quit Mount Olympus for good. You're still standing at the edge of Hephaestus's volcanic forge, the heat radiating off the molten iron like a stubborn reminder that not all gods are born equal. Unlike his flashy siblings, Hephaestus's story begins with a bit of awkwardness, and a whole lot of family drama. You probably didn't realize the god of fire and forge was considered the ugly duckling of Olympus, literally born with a limp that set him apart from the moment he took his first breath, or as close as a god can have a first breath. The myths say Hephaestus was the son of Zeus and Hera, but some versions suggest Hera gave birth to him alone, trying to create a god without Zeus's input. Maybe that's why he came out less than perfect. The story goes that Hera was so horrified by his deformity that she tossed him off Mount Olympus, sending him plummeting to the mortal world. You can imagine the sheer shock, one moment floating among the clouds, the next crashing into the rough earth below. And just like that, the god of the forge began life on the outside, forced to forge his identity from scratch, literally and figuratively. Here's a historical nugget: unlike many Olympians, Hephaestus had a strong cult presence among working-class Greeks. Blacksmiths, artisans, and even metalworkers often dedicated shrines to him. This fact hints at a social divide. Hephaestus was a god of the hands-on, the practical, not the pampered elite. This contrasts with gods like Apollo or Athena, who symbolize lofty ideals and intellectual pursuits. It's like Hephaestus represents the gritty, sweaty reality behind Olympus's polished facade. On the fringe side, some scholars suggest that the story of Hephaestus's fall might have roots in ancient rituals or real volcanic events, like a metaphor for a divine being falling into the fiery earth, embodying the primal forces of fire and metalwork. Historians still argue whether his deformity was meant to symbolize divine imperfection or if it served as a cautionary tale against hubris, since no one wanted a perfect, invincible craftsman who might overshadow the other gods. You watch as Hephaestus, despite his rocky start, claws his way back to Olympus with new tools and inventions, earning grudging respect. But the awkward beginnings have left scars. You can almost feel the simmering bitterness beneath his soot-streaked skin, the feeling of being the odd one out, the god who never quite fits in. no matter how many masterworks he forges. And those scars are about to shape the choices he makes, and ultimately, his dramatic decision to quit Olympus for good. You lean closer now, eyes adjusting to the fiery glow of Hephaestus's forge, where the real magic happens. This is where he's not just the sulking god with a limp, he's the master craftsman, the divine inventor turning raw metal into wonders that leave even Zeus scratching his head. Imagine the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, sparks flying like tiny stars bursting in slow motion, the smell of molten bronze thick in the air. You can almost feel the heat wrapping around you like an uninvited, sweaty hug. Hephaestus isn't just banging out ordinary tools. Oh no, he's behind some of the coolest, most legendary gear in Greek mythology. The god's armor, Zeus's thunderbolts, even the chains that once bound Prometheus, those all came from his genius hands. And here's a fact you might like: ancient Greeks actually believed the forge's fire was sacred, a symbol of civilization itself, showing that fire wasn't just destruction but creation too. That makes Hephaestus kind of like the original tech guru, crafting civilization's backbone long before anyone said innovation. But it's not all sparks and glory. For every masterpiece, there's a grudge brewing. Remember that time he crafted the golden throne that trapped Hera herself? Talk about passive-aggressive god crafting. Some say it was a way for Hephaestus to strike back at his mom, who'd once thrown him off Olympus. Historians still argue whether this story was a literal punishment or more of a symbolic tale about power and control in divine family politics. Here's a quirky tidbit for you: Hephaestus was also thought to create automatons, self-moving statues that could serve as helpers in his workshop. Think of them as ancient Greek robots, probably less eerie and more clunky bronze butler. This blend of myth and proto-technology adds an almost sci-fi twist to the fiery forge, blurring the line between divine magic and early ideas about machinery. As you watch the god hammer out his latest creation, perhaps a weapon or a delicate piece of jewelry, you can't help but notice the undercurrent of frustration. Hephaestus's skill is undeniable, but appreciation? That's another matter. The gods admire his work but don't always treat him like one of their own. It's like being the world's best coder stuck in a cubicle with a boss who barely notices you. This tension between brilliance and resentment fuels the quiet storm brewing in Hephaestus's mind, setting the stage for a moment that will shake Olympus to its core. You follow Hephaestus from the fiery glow of his forge into the tangled, thorny mess of his personal life, where things get awkward real fast. Because while Hephaestus may be the divine craftsman, his love life, let's just say it's less romantic comedy and more awkward family reunion. His marriage to Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and desire, is the kind of union that makes you squint and say, wait, what? You probably expect a perfect match, but nope, this pairing is more like oil and water, or in this case, fire and a whole lot of jealousy. Aphrodite, famously beautiful and flirtatious, wasn't exactly the faithful type. Rumors, ancient gossip that has survived thousands of years, say she had a not-so-secret affair with Ares, the god of war. Imagine the tension at Olympus family dinners. You can almost hear Hephaestus grinding his teeth harder than he hammers his metals. It's like being married to the most popular person at school who's constantly texting their ex. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. Here's an ancient fact for you: marriages among gods were often political or symbolic alliances rather than love matches. So Hephaestus's marriage was partly a power play by Zeus to keep Aphrodite in the family, which makes it less about romance and more about control. This adds a whole new layer of cringe to Hephaestus's story. He's not just battling gods and grudges, but also the painful reality of a loveless marriage. On the fringe side, some myths suggest Hephaestus's lameness was linked to his marital woes, symbolizing the imbalance and disharmony in their relationship. Historians still argue whether his physical imperfection was a metaphor for the emotional scars inflicted by Aphrodite's unfaithfulness or just a standalone mythological trait. You picture the countless moments Hephaestus must have spent in that forge, crafting magnificent gifts for Aphrodite, golden chains to trap her in a web of his own making, perhaps. The irony is thick. His craftsmanship becomes a tool for revenge and control, but also a desperate plea for recognition and love. And all the while, the other gods gossip and laugh behind his back, making him feel more isolated than ever. This complicated, thorny relationship is more than just a subplot. It's a key piece in the puzzle explaining why Hephaestus feels alienated and why the day he finally walks away from Olympus is both inevitable and, frankly, long overdue. You're watching the slow, almost imperceptible shift on Olympus, where the atmosphere thickens with whispered snubs and cold shoulders. Hephaestus, for all his craftsmanship and contributions, starts to feel less like a valued god and more like the divine janitor. The gods parade around in their gleaming armor and silk robes, exchanging praises and petty insults, while he's stuck fixing their mistakes and making the weapons they wield in battles, and getting little more than a grunt in return. Here's a solid historical detail: worship of Hephaestus was often practical and local, centered on craftsmen and laborers rather than the elite ruling class. This might explain why the Olympians themselves sometimes treated him as second tier. He represented the working class, the behind-the-scenes labor that gods like Athena and Apollo overshadowed with their philosophies and music. It's a little like being the tech support of the divine world, except instead of thank you emails, you get eternal snubs. And here's a fringe tidbit that makes things a bit spicier. Some myths suggest Hephaestus's bitterness grew because the gods denied him a place at their high council meetings, effectively silencing his voice in decisions that affected the entire pantheon. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate narrative to highlight class distinctions in ancient Greek society or just a dramatic flair to the myth. You feel the sting as Hephaestus begins to withdraw, retreating deeper into his forge, his silence louder than any argument. The once lively clanging of hammer on anvil now carries a note of sorrow and defiance. You can almost hear him muttering to himself, "Why bother if they don't respect the work?" It's not just about slights and gossip. The gods' dismissiveness is a gnawing wound, a sense of being expendable, a cog in their divine machine. And while the gods revel in their petty squabbles and victories, Hephaestus is planning something far more drastic, a way to reclaim his dignity and maybe teach Olympus a lesson in appreciation. That moment of realization, that he is unwanted and undervalued, marks the turning point. You can almost taste the bitterness in the smoky air as Hephaestus silently vows to quit Olympus for good. It's a decision that will send ripples through the heavens, one that no god saw coming, but maybe should have. The tension finally snaps like a brittle chain under pressure. You're right there when the volcanic rage inside Hephaestus boils over, sparking the great argument that rocks Olympus more than any thunderbolt. The gods are gathered, trading their usual barbs, when Hephaestus, who's been holding back years of resentment, drops the hammer, literally and figuratively. Imagine the scene: Zeus, towering and booming, Hera, fierce as ever, Aphrodite, floating with her usual grace but with a sharp edge, and Hephaestus, the quiet craftsman no one wanted to hear but now speaking with fire in his eyes. The argument starts small, maybe over some insult or overlooked task, but quickly escalates. You can almost hear the clanging of divine voices mixing with the sparks from Hephaestus's forge. Here's a historical detail: ancient Greek myths often depict gods engaging in furious quarrels, mirroring the messy politics of human city-states. These divine arguments weren't just entertainment, they reflected real tensions in Greek society and the importance of honor and respect. Hephaestus's outburst is no exception, embodying the frustration of those who feel marginalized. Now for a fringe twist. Some scholars think this explosive scene might have origins in ancient ritual dramas, where gods were acted out to explore social conflicts and resolutions. Historians still argue whether the argument was a literal myth or a symbolic story illustrating the breakdown of divine order. You see Hephaestus's voice rise, his words sharp as the weapons he forges. He accuses the gods of hypocrisy and neglect, pointing out how they use his creations but never truly acknowledge his worth. The other gods respond with a mix of surprise, anger, and, oddly enough, guilt. But the damage is done. With a dramatic slam of his hammer, Hephaestus declares he's done, he's leaving Olympus for good. The mountain trembles, not just from his anger but from the sheer shock of the declaration. Gods who once ignored him now scramble to react, but Hephaestus is already turning his back, his silhouette disappearing into the fiery smoke of his forge. You can't help but feel the weight of this moment. It's not just a quarrel, it's a divine rebellion, the day Olympus lost its master smith. You're standing at the edge of Olympus as Hephaestus steps off the mountaintop, descending into the mortal world, a place both strange and oddly comforting to him. The air shifts immediately, cooler, less electric, filled with the smells of earth and wood and the everyday hustle of humans who don't know a single thing about gods or their petty squabbles. It's like watching a famous celebrity ditch the red carpet for a quiet dive bar, except with more volcanic ash. Historically, many myths portray gods visiting or retreating to the mortal realm, but Hephaestus's exile is unique because he's not just visiting, he's moving. The idea of a god choosing mortal company over divine peers taps into a deeper ancient theme, the tension between the immortal and the human, perfection and imperfection, glory and grit. It's also why some ancient cults honored Hephaestus as a god who bridged these worlds, offering protection to blacksmiths and artisans who worked with fire and metal on earth. Here's a quirky detail: legends say Hephaestus found refuge on the island of Lemnos, a volcanic place where the earth's fiery breath matches his own forge's heat. The locals supposedly welcomed him as one of their own, celebrating his crafts and inventions. You can almost picture him trading Olympus's cold marble halls for a rustic workshop surrounded by salt and smoke. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect actual ancient worship practices or are poetic ways to explain volcanic activity and craftsmanship. Either way, it's a fascinating glimpse into how ancient people made sense of both the natural world and divine drama. You watch Hephaestus as he walks among mortals, initially awkward, used to celestial grandeur but slowly learning to appreciate human creativity and resilience. The mortal world isn't perfect, fire can burn, metal can rust, but it's real, raw, and honest. For once, he isn't the overlooked god of a distant mountain, he's a craftsman among craftsmen, finding new purpose away from Olympus's snide gods and cold glances. It's a fresh start, but also a lonely one. You sense that Hephaestus's journey is far from over. Exile is just the beginning of a new chapter, one where the lines between God and man blur in unexpected ways. You follow Hephaestus as he settles into his new life away from Olympus, surrounded by the roar of volcanoes and the scent of molten metal. It's a rough life, certainly, not cushy like the golden halls, but it's honest. You can practically feel the heat radiating off the blacksmith's forge as he crafts wonders not for divine approval but for mortal needs. It's a world where his skill is respected and vital, where he's no longer the punchline of celestial gossip but a revered creator. Here's a historical fact: the island of Lemnos, where Hephaestus supposedly made his home, was a real place with a strong volcanic presence. Archaeological finds show ancient metalworking and worship practices that align with the myths, suggesting that people really did see Hephaestus as a patron of their craft. His story wasn't just fairy tale, it was woven into the daily lives of real artisans who depended on fire and metal. On the fringe side, some myths tell of Hephaestus creating automated servants, bronze giants and mechanical helpers who could do the heavy lifting in his workshop. Think of it as ancient Greek robotics, blurring the lines between magic and early technology. Historians still argue whether these stories were early science fiction or symbolic tales about innovation and the human desire to control nature. You get the sense that Hephaestus is changing, too, not just physically moving, but mentally and emotionally. Away from Olympus's politics, he finds a new kind of freedom. The bitterness fades, replaced by quiet pride in his work and a growing connection to the people who rely on his gifts. It's a reminder that sometimes, walking away from the spotlight leads to a brighter, if humbler, kind of light. Yet, even in exile, Hephaestus's story isn't just about escape. It's about transformation, how leaving a toxic environment can reveal strengths and talents buried beneath years of neglect. It's a journey that feels surprisingly human, despite the divine setting, a reminder that even gods need to step back, regroup, and find new paths. And so, as the molten metal cools in his forge, you realize that Hephaestus's quitting Olympus wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something unexpected and profound. You're drawn deeper into the quiet revolution Hephaestus sparks in his exile, where his influence stretches far beyond molten metal and fiery forges. Far from Olympus's drama, his creations begin to shape the mortal world in ways even the gods hadn't predicted. The inventions and tools born in his workshop empower humans, giving them strength, protection, and the means to carve out civilizations. It's like watching the spark of human progress ignite, fueled by a god's skill and determination. Historically, Hephaestus's role as the divine smith symbolized the transformative power of technology and craftsmanship in ancient Greek culture. Blacksmithing wasn't just a trade, it was a sacred art that underpinned military power, agriculture, and everyday life. His myths celebrate the human ability to create, to harness fire and metal to shape their destiny, making him a symbol of innovation long before the Industrial Revolution. Here's a quirky myth. Some tales credit Hephaestus with the invention of the first musical instruments and even complex machines like automated tripods and chariots. Imagine a god tinkering with proto-robotics, blending artistry with engineering, a blend that fascinates modern scholars who see these myths as ancient imaginings of technology and creativity. Historians still argue whether these stories were allegories for early technological advancements or simply fanciful myths to explain the mysterious powers of craftsmanship. You watch as Hephaestus's exile inadvertently democratizes divine power, shifting it from an exclusive celestial privilege to a mortal skill accessible through knowledge and hard work. This shift unsettles the Olympians, who realize that the craftsman they dismissed is quietly reshaping the world below, building a legacy no throne or thunderbolt can match. It's a bittersweet victory. Hephaestus may have left Olympus in anger, but in doing so, he redefined what it means to be powerful. Not through status or brute force, but through creativity, resilience, and the humble art of making things with your hands. And as you absorb this, you can't help but admire the god who chose exile over acceptance in a broken family, forging his own path with sweat, fire, and an unbreakable spirit. You stand at the edge of Hephaestus's story, where his absence from Olympus leaves a void as deep as a volcanic crater. The gods, once so quick to dismiss him, begin to feel the impact of his departure. Without the master craftsman, the divine armory falters, the golden thrones lose their shine, and the thunderbolts lose their spark. It's a cosmic inconvenience that turns into a crisis, shaking Olympus to its core and forcing the gods to reckon with what they've lost. A historical fact to ponder: the Greeks often viewed the smith god as a necessary balance to their pantheon, representing the physical and creative labor essential to civilization. Losing him symbolized not just a mythological gap but a reflection of the fragile social order dependent on every role, no matter how overlooked. This shows how mythology often mirrors real human dynamics. When a crucial player leaves, chaos often follows. Here's a quirky detail: some myths suggest that Hephaestus's absence caused volcanoes and earthquakes to rage more fiercely, as if the earth itself missed its fiery sun. Historians still argue whether these stories were early attempts to explain natural disasters or symbolic expressions of divine unrest. Either way, it's a dramatic illustration of how deeply intertwined Hephaestus was with both nature and culture. You watch the gods scramble, realizing too late that Hephaestus's role wasn't just about making things, it was about holding Olympus together. His craft was the glue of the divine world, binding power and creativity, order and chaos. And now, with him gone, the gods are left with a hollow throne and brittle thunderbolts. As the story winds down, you can almost hear the soft echo of a hammer's last strike, fading into the distance but never quite disappearing. Hephaestus's decision to quit Mount Olympus for good isn't just a myth about a god walking away, it's a powerful reminder that everyone, even gods, needs respect, purpose, and a place to belong. And with that, you settle back, feeling the weight of the tale sink in, the craftsman who refused to be ignored, whose exile changed the world forever. Now, as the echoes of Olympus settle and the fiery forge cools to a gentle glow, let yourself breathe out the tension that's been simmering beneath the surface. You've traveled through divine halls and volcanic retreats, felt the sting of rejection and the heat of creation. It's a story wrapped in fire and shadow, but also in resilience, the kind that quietly shapes worlds. Imagine the soft crackle of embers fading, the rhythmic tap of a hammer slowing to a pause. Hephaestus's journey reminds us that sometimes, stepping away from the spotlight doesn't mean giving up, it means finding a new flame within. It's okay to walk away from places that don't see your worth, to build your own path even when the sky feels heavy with judgment. Feel the warmth of that forge as a comforting pulse, a steady heartbeat beneath the surface of myth and legend. The gods may have lost their smith, but the world gained something far more enduring, a symbol of creativity, strength, and quiet rebellion. So as you drift off tonight, carry with you this gentle truth, that even in the silence after the hammer falls, the spirit of Hephaestus lives on. In every spark that flies from the anvil, in every crafted tool and work of art, there's a whisper of the god who chose to forge his destiny on his own terms. Now, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the fire of that story warm you as you slip into dreams, knowing the world is full of quiet strength waiting to be discovered.